So we're here today in part because our community member, Andrew Slade, has a connection to the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance and therefore has a connection with Clayton. And so Andrew Slade put me and Clayton in contact with one another regarding Tuesday group. And then of course, right now, Andrew and his wife, Sally, who you may recall introduced themselves at New Elites a couple sessions ago, they are in Utah right now. So they really lament that they couldn't be here, but Andrew wanted to say, share a few words. So glad that you're here, Clayton. And he said, except for the climate and scenery, Northeast Minnesota and Southeast Utah have a lot in common. He says, I hope y'all learn a lot today, and he looks forward to talking with anyone who wants to have a follow-up conversation regarding Utah wilderness advocacy. So make sure that if you are compelled today to keep the conversation going, that you're in touch with both Clayton and our local pal, Andrew Slade. So without further ado, I will just say that Clayton Daughenbaugh, it would have been smart to ask first, but anyways, Clayton Daughenbaugh, he'll tell us the real pronunciation, is the organizing director for the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, a recipient of the Sierra Club's highest award for national volunteer leadership, and a resident of Chicago. We're so glad to have you here with us today, Clayton.
So my last name now has 101 correct pronunciation. So thank you all for coming out. Tell me if I'm not speaking into the mic correctly, so that everyone can hear me. And I see we got two mics, one for the Zoom. Hello, folks out there on Zoom, wherever you are. I just want to start out by saying what a real privilege it is to be here. Your community, your human community, your more than human community has a really outsized place in the history of the wilderness movement. And so it really is a privilege to be here. And I'm kind of honored that y'all be at least pretending to give me some attention here today to talk about Utah wilderness. It's with really genuine and deep appreciation that I'm here and enjoying the landscape and enjoying your company today. And in exchange for your willingness to listen to me today, those of you who might be interested in some extended conversation where I can listen more to you. We're going to get together at Northern Grounds at 9 a.m. Thursday morning. So if anybody'd like to come have a cup of coffee and chat, I'll be there, and I'll be there even if nobody else is there. But I think we already have a couple others who I know who are going to show up. So I just wanted to make kind of a general invitation for that. Let's go ahead and get into this talk. I wanted to start out with this picture because, well, it wears our name all across the top, so you're sure to know who we are. But it also has four gentlemen in it that kind of are representative of how we go about over the years getting protections for the wildlands in southern Utah that are managed by the Bureau of Land Management, which is the land man. Well, y'all do have acquaintance with the BLM around here having to do with various permitting. But anyway, mostly it's the Forest Service. But the person on the far right in this picture is Wayne Hoskison. He still remains the volunteer wilderness lead for the Utah chapter of the Sierra Club. He was one of the folks who was involved in the very beginnings back in the 1980s of the inventory work that defined the wilderness proposal that I'm here to talk about and advocate for. And so he's a representative both of our deep history, but also the coalition effort that is involved in gaining protections for these lands. We have the Utah Wilderness Coalition, of which SUA, the Sierra Club, and the Natural Resources Defense Council form the steering committee, but there's 100 or so other organizations who have also stepped up to identify themselves with this protection effort. And so Wayne kind of represents that. Standing next to him there is my boss, Scott Groney, who's the executive director of Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance. Scott has been involved in this not quite as long as Wayne has, but he goes back quite a ways. Moving further up, the gentleman in the American flag shirt is Mark Mariboy. Mark is a former member of the Navajo Nation Governing Council, the first Native American elected to a county commission in the state of Utah, and I cannot swear to this, but I think the first elected to a county commission in the whole United States. But somebody someday will correct me if I'm wrong. But Mark is very central to the broader conservation efforts inside the state of Utah and also regarding the Navajo reservation. I suspect most of you are acquainted with Bears Ears National Monument and its existence and the controversy surrounding it. Of course, with something like that, there is no one person who could ever possibly be responsible for it happening. But if there is a father to Bears Ears National Monument, it's Mark. He was the chair of the board of the Dene-Bakea, the native nonprofit that really put together the proposal for Bears Ears, and in so many ways has been a real pathfinder for conservation. I could go on all day just talking about Mark, but you'll get to see him and hear from him a little bit in the video I'm going to show in a little while. And then the last person sort of leading the crew there on that hike in Bears Ears National Monument is Senator Richard Durbin from Illinois. So that's my senator, and he has been the lead sponsor for the flagship legislation, America's Red Rock Wilderness Act, for this protection effort since 1997, when we persuaded him. He was a rookie senator at that time, and he's been instrumental in the protection effort and is also demonstrative of one of the main strategic approaches that we have in gaining protections. We have a problem with the Utah congressional delegation, and that none of them like wilderness. And so the big strategic approach that we've made with a fair amount of success is that we go national, which is why I'm here from Chicago and Ely, Minnesota, to talk about Utah. So that kind of represents, I think, kind of an overview of how we proceed in gaining protections, and this thing is working. So the next thing I want to do is just right off the bat, since beating around the bush, ask you to help. This is the high technology version of helping out. So if you have your smartphone and you want to do this, you can sign up and send a message about America's Red Rock Wilderness Act, ARRWA, to your members of Congress. Of course, there'll be a form to fill out when you get there. You can do it now, or you can do it later, or you can not do it at all, because I also have, for most folks, I didn't prepare for this many, the low-tech version of doing this. And so there's newsletters in front of most of the chairs here. On the back inside cover is a map of Utah showing where the lands are that we're working to protect. In the middle of those newsletters are 3 postcards. There's one for each of your senators, and there's one for in case you'd like to do more to help out. And there's 3 things that are on the postcard for wanting to do more. One is if you have an interest, assuming the occasion arises, in assisting us with conversations with members of Congress from Minnesota. You can check that off and we'll get back to you if and when that arises. If you know of some other group that's interested in this sort of presentation, check that off. I'll get back in touch and we'll figure out if we can match calendars and make that happen. This is a big part of my job, so I'm only the second time I've been to Ely, and I think I'd be happy to come back. So if you know somebody like that, check that off and I'll get back in touch. And also, if you know of an organization that might have an interest in considering becoming part of the Utah Wilderness Coalition, you can check that off as well. And I bring the tool that you might need in order to fill out postcards. If you need a pen, take it, because you'll see that I steal lots of pens from hotels. Anyway, so pass that around. So what I want to do is start with a little bit of context for the bigger picture within which I feel our work fits. Context is not quite everything, but it means a lot. And then I have a 15-minute advocacy film, and then I'm going to delve in more specifically to the wilderness proposal and the national effort to get protection, and how it also relates to climate change and the mass extinction crisis, which you'll hear a little bit about here in the beginning as well. And I'm hoping we're going to have some time for question and answer before I'm done. So I'm going to move kind of quickly here, I think, to try and get this done. And so the first thing with context is just to recognize how beautiful this place is in Utah. How many folks here have been out to southern Utah? It's about half, a little over half the crowd. That's pretty good. So you know what I'm talking about. This is one of my favorite places. This is one of the bridges and Natural Bridges National Monument. And you can see there that, well, you have them here too, a gazillion stars. It's the kind of thing, it makes you feel small and insignificant, because we are small and insignificant. But it also is kind of ennobling, because we're a part of this. And it has brought to my life a great deal of meaning. It's a spiritual experience for me. Be in a place like this. I've raised my kids to hike is to pray, and that's pretty much how I feel about it. And I could go on and on about how wonderful Utah is, and I did want to start there because that's the critical piece, the thing that got me involved in this effort back in 1995, then as a volunteer, now paid. But since then, I've kind of realized that there's more to this than my own personal spiritual experience and how wonderful I think the state of Utah is, or the wildlands in it. And this picture really kind of represents that. And what it reminds me of is, well, talking about small and insignificant, we really look small and insignificant in the view of this picture. And it's a reminder to me that most of the time when we're talking about protecting special places, natural places, we kind of think of it as an act of charity. Something that, you know, places that are pretty nice, we'll let them be the way they are, that we're not going to use up those particular places. And this picture tells me that that's really not true. The universe is wild. We in the non-wild places are actually the exception. And the universe, the wild universe, has its own ways of operating, of which we're a part. It subsumes us into it. And if we don't live our lives collectively as a species, the human species, in a way that's consistent with that, we do so at our own jeopardy. So protecting these places is not so much an act of charity as it is an act of self-preservation. And that's the bigger context in which I think we should think about these kind of protection efforts, what we're involved in Utah, and what many of you are involved here in the Boundary Waters region. So we need to live in a way, we need to learn to live in a way that is consistent with the way the natural processes in the universe operate. But we're really not doing too well. We are burning the candle on both ends. And I'm kind of referencing climate change here. We're all pretty familiar with the problems that arise from putting too much carbon into the atmosphere, and the increasing heat and the consequences of that that flow from it. We don't think quite as much about, well, there's a reason we call them fossil fuels. The earth is very good at drawing carbon down out of the atmosphere and storing it in the ground. If it wasn't so good at that, we wouldn't have all those fuels down there to dig out and burn and put all the carbon in the atmosphere. If we don't save the places that still have the capacity to draw down that carbon and in fact grow those places, we are increasing the jeopardy in which we're in. And that, in fact, is what's happening. So there's two sides to the climate change issue. There's the issue of dumping too much carbon in the atmosphere, and there's the issue of not retaining the planet's capacity to draw it down out of the atmosphere and store it. But it's also part of an even bigger problem that we have, which is the mass extinction crisis that exists these days. We are rapidly losing species all across the planet. It's the beginning, the scientists tell us, and I'm no scientist, I'm an organizer, but it's the beginning of the sixth mass extinction. At least 4 of the previous 5, and the 5th one, I guess, is a point of debate. It involved an asteroid. But at least 4 of those 5 are directly carbon related. And it's worth keeping in mind what a mass extinction means. That's by definition, when 75% of the species on the planet disappear. So we should pause to think about that figure just a little bit. If we keep acting, going about our business in the way that we are, what are our long-term options? They're 1 in 4, approximately. That's not good odds. So again, what we're talking about here today is trying to protect a special, wonderful place in southern Utah, but it's part of a larger effort that is really just beginning across the country and across the world that we need to do to transform the way we live. And one of the transformations we need to make is to keep alive and healthy the natural and wild places that still exist on this planet. And so I'll move along here and just say a bit more about the extent of the habitat destruction that's taking place on the planet, because it's at historic levels in the history of this planet since humans came to be one of the occupants on the surface. And you can see just in the last 120 years, we've lost an enormous amount of natural habitat. And the loss of species in the last just 20 or so years has been accelerating at an extraordinarily rapid pace. So we need to save these places. We need to save the Red Rock country. We need to save the forest boundary waters. And it is it's a matter of self-preservation, as well as it is a matter of just saving places that really deserve to be saved because of what they are. But I come at this, now that I've been doing all this doom and gloom, I actually come at this from a position of hope. And this map kind of represents that for me. You can look at the places of color that are on this map, which are basically the United States public lands and the tribal lands inside this country. And these are the places where Mother Nature still is holding her own, by and large. Of course, there's other places in addition to this, so this is representative. We need to save these places, and they're there, and they're the stronghold from which we can grow and from which we can transform so that we can live in a way that in 1,000 years from now, there'll still be a few of us here, and maybe a lot of us still thriving and surviving on this planet. So these are the places to start. These are the places to rally around. And that's why I'm here, is to ask you guys to step up and help out. And I know many of you are already doing that. And I realize I'm asking for just a little bit more. So what I want to do now is move into the video. Maybe you better help me out with this. So I'm sure that the technology is working right. I'm going to let you do it.
Sure.
Walked into the forest and the rim of the canyon. And it's a friendly place once you get over the stunning space and silence and the mountains that are out there on the horizon 100 miles away. And then all of a sudden you do start to see life. You see lizards skittering off under a rock. You hear a flock of pinion jays collecting nuts out of those pinion cones. And a raven flies by, and then with a little Laka Canyon wren, the glissade of a canyon wren's call, the sort of theme song of the canyon country, a musical waterfall that brings you up short, and you just stop and listen. The sculptural forms of slow climb, just the texture, the light, the combination of stone and sky and twisted juniper with an occasional river running through. It's just a landscape that speaks to me.
Wilderness helps people remember their humanity and their sense of who they are, a planet that they're floating on in the middle of the universe, under the stars. I think the ability to hear yourself in the wilderness is something special that you don't get anywhere else, where if it's not your own thoughts, your own breathing, it's the environment around you. There's a strong sense of stewardship that I feel a lot of Latinx people have about our environment, whether they're in the urban environment or whether they spend time in public lands. It's something that unites all of us.
The wildland wilderness is very important to the Navajo people because they represent who they are, their way of life, their education, and their language, and their direct connection to sacred site, the canyons, the valleys, and that's all a part of the religion. When they say enough embodies the entire wilderness concept. There are lots and lots of animals, ears, bears, snakes, spiders. They are the brothers and sisters of mankind. And we speak for them. And in a lot of ways, they take care of the land, Mother Earth, every day.
I keep saying the word extraordinary because it's hard to describe this landscape if you haven't seen it, but there's nothing else like it on planet Earth.
the fight around public land. And what does it mean to have public lands? What's that mean for our communities and our nation? We're lucky in Utah that we have huge landscapes that we can go in and find solitude. Our public lands here in Utah. If you're from New York City, they're yours. If you're from Boston, they're yours. If you're from Los Angeles, they're yours. If you're from Nephi, Utah, they're yours. And that's the great thing about wilderness and the great thing about public lands.
Utah has been a battleground over the last 35 years, mostly because the politicians that represent this state fail to actually represent the views of the people that live here. And their views are more akin to the oil and gas industry and the mining companies that make heavy contributions to their campaigns. This land is constantly under threat, and without united citizen action, it will be lost.
Some of the most serious threats for land proposed as wilderness right now, oil and gas leasing, mining, off-road vehicle usage, basically any human impact that has the potential to destroy the ecosystem. Fossil fuel development on Utah's wilderness lands also damages our planetary health by accelerating the devastating impacts of climate change. Elected officials in the state of Utah are also seeking to limit the lands available for wilderness designation by claiming that thousands of unused dirt tracks and jeep trails are actually state highways under an obscure law known as RS 2477 from the 1860s. The state of Utah is trying to seize public lands in Utah from the American people, demanding that America's public lands be turned over to state ownership and control. These short-sighted policies place short-term profits over our long-term responsibility to protect our most cherished places, the last places we should sacrifice.
Their main objective is energy development, and I think it goes further than that. Most of our county commissioners are states' rights activists, and they are in favor of removing any federal government control, and they want the state and the county to control all the policies and all the laws pertaining to mineral extraction.
In addition to facing so many threats from climate change, we're also a region that's contributing to climate change because a lot of public lands are being set aside for energy development. If we want to think about climate change seriously, I think it also pushes us to rethink how we manage public lands and think about how we can protect more places rather than prioritize them for fossil fuel extraction.
Coming home from Iraq, it took me a couple of years to find my way outside. And when I found my way outside and on public lands, things started to click for me in a way that they hadn't before, both from a sense of healing as well as recognizing what at least nominally I fought for.
There's got to be some place where they're left alone, be free from industrial energy development. In Bears region is one of the last remaining pristine wilderness that must be protected.
In order to protect these lands, citizens of Utah formulated America's Red Rock Wilderness Act. This legislation, which is currently before Congress, will protect over 9 million acres of public land in Utah. It will protect the wildlife, water, and air. It would also preserve the remains of Native American cultures that have been here for thousands of years. America's Red Rock Wilderness Act will prevent oil and gas drilling, mining, and off-road vehicles from causing irreparable damage to these lands. It would also ensure that these public lands remain public ownership, available for all of us to hike, camp, hunt, fish, or simply spend time with family and friends in wild nature.
The public lands in Utah aren't just Utahns' public lands. They belong to everyone. They belong to all Americans.
In the last 30 years, Utah politicians have time and time again tried to pass legislation through Congress that would open these lands to development. And time again, citizens from Utah banded together with Americans across the country to stop them. And so the important thing is that you have to have a mass movement with people across the country to build the political strength to stand up to the politicians of Utah.
I think first and foremost, everybody needs to know that these are their lands. And whatever happens to them, they should always have a stake in what it is. Doesn't make a difference where you live or where you come from. These are public lands. They belong to citizens of the United States.
Citizen action is crucial to the future of Utah's public lands, partly because unfortunately, our Utah delegation has not stepped up to their responsibility to protect this land.
Decision makers respond to public pressure. And we have to show up, no matter who the person is that we've elected to office. We have to show up and tell them what we think. So it's up to us to educate them. I encourage everyone I talk to write letters to the editor. Elected officials read those, they pay attention to them, to keep track of how many support one position and how many support another.
The young generation is bringing in these new ideas of how we think about wild places and showing that we need these for our spiritual sustenance, and that we love these wild places. And there's kind of the stereotype that public lands are where like the old white gray hairs go. And so I think it's powerful to bring in these diverse voices. And I think that's where the real leadership will lie, because it not only shows how many people value these spaces, but also brings in new ways of thinking about how we can protect them for the long term. Young people can make a difference in the future of Utah's wildlands, because the voice that young people give to wild places in Utah, the agency that they give to wild places by speaking for them, is really what's going to lead to protected designations in unprotected wild spaces in Utah. Having a restaurant here on the edge of wilderness, I'm in contact every year with thousands of people who have just come out of public lands. And what I hear again and again from them is that wilderness fixes something in them. They long for it, they need it, and then to have the experience of being in it and not to be surrounded by other people, they get to fix something in their hearts. And so it's incredibly important that everyone, all of us who care about wild places, that we get involved, that we speak up for what we love.
It reminded me of what they say in Mexico when the baby's born, dar la luz, to give to the light. And that's what it felt like coming out of that song. But keeping to the light.
It is very important for people of all walks of life to come together and stand up and say enough is enough. This is our home. And if we don't say no, if we don't speak up, we can destroy our home. We are so lucky to live on this earth, Mother Earth. We have beautiful landscapes, the sky, the sunlight, and we have young children, many generations to come. And we cannot afford to stand by and allow people to destroy our environment. That's the reason why we should all stand together. There is no distinction of nationality. We're all the children of Mother Earth, and we must protect her.
So, speaking of solutions, I'm realizing I neglected to tell everybody what I'm gonna do with all those postcards I'm asking you to sign. Before I move on, I just want to say that we gather these together, and when we have meetings with the congressional offices, we provide them then. Usually there's just a handful of us in those meetings, and it's a way of demonstrating much broader support around the state and around the country for those. So please fill them out and leave them here, and I will collect them afterwards. You can just leave them on the table and I'll pick them up. I wanted to explain a little bit about America's Red Rock Wilderness Act, which is the result of the Utah Wilderness Coalition's citizens proposal that Wayne and many others put together a good number of years ago. The inventory work that has gone into this was then and continues to be quite exhaustive. We have shelves and shelves of pre-computer documentation in the Salt Lake office of the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, backing up the foundation of the wilderness proposal. And of course, it's all on computer now. And we have 4 people on staff whose job it is to make sure that it stays up to date, and it's the biggest part of their job. And you can see the areas. If I can get this thing to, there we, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Try one more time. Okay, well, all right. There's kind of this burnt orange color that's on there. These are the lands that are in America's Red Rock Wilderness Act. You'll also see kind of a gray-green color on some of the land. I'm a little colorblind, so we may have these colors wrong. And those are the lands that we've gotten designated as wilderness so far over the course of our work. And then down in the southeast corner of the state, you'll see where Bears Ears National Monument is. And to the left of that is Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. So we've passed 3 pieces of legislation and gotten 2 national monuments over the years. The last 20 years, I think the stat is that only the state of California exceeds the state of Utah in the amount of land that's been moved into protective designations over time. And we've done this with almost perpetually uniformly, not just Republican, but far right-wing Republican congressional delegation in place. The lands in the sea green color, they're kind of in the middle, is in Emery County. It illustrates the point about why America's Red Rock Wilderness Act is so important, and the co-sponsorships to legislation, which I'll talk about in a minute, are because that was a proposal that Senator Hatch from Utah, who is no longer the senator, put in as sort of his parting wish. It was a pretty lousy piece of wilderness legislation. No, it was wilderness legislation. It was too small. It was riddled with loopholes. And because of the 25 Senate co-sponsors, we had Senator Durbin could go to Senator Hatch and say, you know what, your bill's not going to pass, but maybe we can talk and we can make it better. We got rid of the loopholes. We added 250,000 acres of wilderness, and we passed the largest wilderness bill to pass in the last 20 years there in Emery County. And lo and behold, President Trump signed it into law. So as part of a much larger public lands package. Which brings me to the point of America's Red Rock Wilderness Act and why it's important. It's a piece of legislation that's been around now for decades. It is not threatening to pass in the current Congress, though it will be introduced Thursday, reintroduced. And these are the 3 things that this legislation does for us. First of all, it's the vision. It defines the vision. It defines the turf of the debate about Utah. Literally, it says these are the places that are on the ground, that are wild, that we're going to fight to protect. This is what the lands protection debate in Utah, and it's a very large debate in the state of Utah, is all about. It also defines the turf in other ways. It is the point of the debate. So it defines the political turf as well as the turf, the literal turf on the ground. It's also the vehicle for moving these protections forward. It provides the thing that year in and year out, I can come and talk to you about, and you can do something to tangibly help protect this this land protection effort. It also enables us to organize, not just across the country, but in the United States Congress. That's why we seek all of these co-sponsorships. A co-sponsorship is when a member of Congress goes on record officially saying that they are in favor of a piece of legislation before there's ever a vote that's taken on it. And it means that if we have something bad that we have to fight off, and there's been a dozen of those pieces of legislation over the years, that we have a crew of folks who are ready to work to help fight that off. Or if there's something that we can make better or that is good and we want to pass, it's the foundation on which we build in Congress to move that forward. So those co-sponsorships are a critical tool for our overall effort. And it's the driver for the whole effort because it puts us at the table. The Utah congressional delegation and the Utah state legislature in general, to say they are not interested in wilderness is to be extraordinarily light. They are adamantly opposed. And so without this legislation defining the turf, the country, the support it has all across the country, and the substantial support it actually has among the people of Utah, we wouldn't be at the table. It puts us at the table in these conversations, and that's how we're actually able to avoid harm and move forward. There was, before we put this together, we were rapidly losing wildlands inside the state of Utah. Since we put this together in the mid 80s, we've lost 1% of the land area in there. So while we attain sizable permanent protections, we have also attained de facto protection just because of good old red, white, and blue democracy. People filling out postcards, having meetings with Congress, participating in comment periods week after week, month after month, year after year. That's the bedrock. That's the bedrock of our strength. So here in Minnesota, this is what it looks like. As I said, America's Red Rock Wilderness Act will be reintroduced. Actually, it's tomorrow in the Senate and Thursday in the House. And I can report as of 10 o'clock this morning that everybody on the DFL delegation here in the state of Minnesota has agreed to be a co-sponsor. We've got the last two this morning. So that's a success, and that's kind of been the track record for the last few years. It hasn't always been that way. It's taken a lot of work by Minnesotans all across the state to get us to that place, but that's where we are. And so that part of the foundation, the bedrock for holding the line and moving things forward is in place. So your postcards will largely be thank you messages. Thank yous are important. We all like to be thanked when we do something good. Members of Congress especially like to be thanked when they do something good. So please go home, give your two senators a phone call and say thank you for supporting America's Red Rock Wilderness Act. So I want to take a couple minutes before I wrap up to talk about how this land protection effort influences our efforts to address the climate and extinction crisis. I want to circle back here to this whole concept of carbon sequestration and storage, and point out that while forests do a wonderful job of sequestering carbon and storing it both in the trees and the plants and the shrubs, and actually most of this is down in the roots, that the desert is a surprisingly effective place for doing this as well. And now I'm getting in over my head. I'm no scientist, but these are the two things that really help us store carbon in the desert environment. Caliche is basically a rock that stores carbon that is brought down through the roots and eventually transforms into rock in the landscape. Glomalin is a fungi around the roots, and these things store enormous amounts of carbon. As you can see here, the amount of carbon in things like caliche around the world is, well, enormous is the right word to describe how much of that carbon is. But these places have to remain undisturbed for that process to continue. And if you disturb the surface, and if you get down underneath them, not only does that sequestration process end, it starts releasing carbon into the atmosphere. So you can see why protecting these places is crucial to our future. Then there's the more traditional way of thinking about this. Last 20 years is long enough to call it traditional, but there's a lot of carbon under the ground inside the state of Utah in the form of coal and oil and gas. Nearly as much as 6% equivalent of the carbon budget established by the Paris Climate Accords. That doesn't mean if we save all this that we've got 6% of the job done, because they may burn this fuel down in Louisiana or over in Russia or something like that. But it gives you an idea of how much carbon we can keep out of the atmosphere by making sure that that it stays in the ground underneath these lands covered by America's Red Rock Wilderness Act. Also, this region is a key place for climate refugia, the little places, the niches that wildlife goes to hide out while it adapts to the changing climatic conditions. The variability in the terrain in southern Utah is quite extreme. You're constantly going up to 10,000 feet and down to 4,000 feet. That's the canyon lands and the streams that are down in there. So there's many of these niches that are called climate refugial pockets for places for critters and plants to hold out in. So this particular region makes that unique contribution to addressing the extinction crisis. Also, these are large core areas that are connected through corridors to other large core areas, and that connectivity is vital for wildlife's capacity to adapt as climate change hits the region. Then we're in a multi-decade drought, which we're getting a little relief from this year, several feet of snow up in the mountains in Utah. 1 year does not end a drought of that length, but who knows, maybe we'll get lucky. But time will tell on that score. But this connectivity is vital to addressing the extinction crisis, and this protecting these areas is a crucial way of providing and sustaining that connectivity in the Intermountain region of the North American continent. I also want to give a shout out to the Navajo and Hopi tribal councils, which over the course of the last year, both of them have voted to endorse America's Red Rock Wilderness Act. For the Navajo, it was the climate change aspects of this that was most persuasive. For the Hopi, it is the cultural connection. They have deep cultural roots in the landscape out here. And it's the collaborative work on many things, most prominently Bears Ears National Monument, that has led to this endorsement, which to us is something that's quite important and a precious part of our land protection efforts. So this is what we've accomplished over the years. We've put 1 million acres into wilderness designation. There's about 2.5 million acres in BLM wilderness study areas, which here maybe you're not too acquainted with those, but it's a land designation that the Federal Land Policy and Management Act authorizes for the BLM, where it sets aside areas to preserve their wilderness character, and only Congress can undo it. The agency cannot. And then there's an additional 1 million acres over and above that that's got a level of protection not as good as wilderness protection and the 2 national monuments. So it's 4.5 million acres we're about halfway there, and it means we got halfway to go in terms of the protections. If we got everything we wanted all at once, it would all be designated as wilderness. Anybody here who's ever gotten everything they wanted all at once? I asked everywhere I go, and I haven't found that person. But we piece it together, and we use America's Red Rock Wilderness Act as the umbrella and the driving force for this effort. And who knows, maybe someday when America's Red Rock Wilderness Act is down to 1 million acres, maybe we'll pass it to when that time comes. So we do all of this for these folks so that these places will still be there when they grow up and when they have kids and they grow up and their kids grow up. But we also do it because these places have their own intrinsic value. They deserve to be protected, even if no human ever sets eye or foot on them. And that's it. So there's my email address. There's that high-tech thing you can do to help out, and the list of the other items that are on that yellow postcard. And do we have time for questions? Yes.
Yeah, are there any significant exceptions in the Red Rock Wilderness Act to the basic principles of the 1964 Act?
ARWA is what's called a clean wilderness bill. We don't have any of that in there. I should say that despite the appearance on the map, it's not one big, huge, contiguous mass of the boundaries are drawn around the roads. We've got about a little over 60 units in the overall proposal. And it's generally dirt roads that form the boundaries. Most places in the proposal are within 5 miles of a road of some sort. But of course, we draw the boundaries around the roads, but it's a clean bill. Anything else? Yeah.
Right there, here, are there any water issues related to the?
Oh, there's lots of water issues. The biggest one being we don't have enough. The one in particular that I think is worth drawing attention to has to do with the cryptobiotic crust, the plants that cover the surface of the dirt in the desert out there, which is actually a big source of the carbon sequestration. Their roots run very deep into the soil. They're very fragile. If you step on it, it may take years for decades for it to grow back. If you drive over it, you're looking at 100 years left alone for that stuff to grow back. It holds the dirt in place. When the crypto is destroyed or damaged, the winds come, they pick the dust up, they blow it onto the snowpack and the Rockies, which is the source of the water for the Colorado River. They darken the snowpack. I mean, it's like putting a black shirt on to go out in the winter. It's a little bit warmer than a white shirt. And it means the snowpack melts more rapidly, more extensively than it would otherwise. And the estimates are that from that, we lose each year the equivalent of the amount of water that Los Angeles consumes in a year. And so again, protecting the surface of the landscape helps to preserve the water supply, which in the desert means a whole lot. So there's other ways, but I think that's the primary one to mention. We got one here, there's another, I don't know. You want me to shut up? Yes, go ahead. Not a lot, really. They're mostly concerned with private lands, and these are all public lands. There are a couple places out there where they have some operations, but they haven't been a big part of the effort.
Thanks, Clayton.
I just wanted to say that when we started 11 years ago to build our national coalition, campaign to save the Mountain Waters with Northeastern Minnesota's Wilderness, we modeled ourselves off of SUA. And we knew like you have said today, that you have to nationalize our public lands issues if we're going to be successful. Although we have a split delegation, 4 members of the House of Representatives are Democrats who support protecting the Mountain Waters, 4 Republicans who do not. And like you, one of our big champions is Senator Dick Durbin. And so he's sort of an unsung hero that people really don't, I don't think, fully appreciate in his defense of America's public land. So I'm glad that you mentioned him, and he is a hero of the Red Rock Wilderness. So thank you, and thank you for all the organizing and good work you've done for Southern Utah, and thank you for really providing a lot of guidelines for the rest of America when we try to save public lands in other parts of the world. So thank you.
Yeah, well, so thank you and thank all of you. You have an iconic landscape here as well. And it is the kind of place that can draw that kind of national attention. And I'm going to add to the shout out to my senator. He was an intern for Senator Paul Douglas when Senator Douglas from Illinois put together what's now the Indiana Dunes National Park for the state next door. He was often considered the 3rd senator from Indiana. And he has repeatedly referred to Senator Douglas as a role model for his work on public lands across the country. And it is true. In the background, unsung, I sound like I'm bragging, but I think I'm just stating facts. On public lands issues and conservation issues behind the scenes, we rely on him in ways we'll probably never know. So it's wonderful having him as my senator.
Smith and Amy Klobuchar are co-sponsors of the Red Rock Wilderness Bill, and they don't have our wilderness bill in the Senate yet. And so if they can unite, protect Utah's wilderness, we need to urge them to unite to protect the Mountain Waters. So that's a stick it on the bottom of your postcard.
There you go.
Hey.
There's a high school green club in Minneapolis that I've been working with, and they met with Senator Smith's staff in St. Paul, and they went in and they did their Red Rock pitch, and after that they did the Boundary Waters pitch, and they asked if she would introduce and the staff demurred a little bit and was non-committal, but anyway, those students got, I mean, a half dozen of them and 30 more in their class. They're the ones who got Senator Smith. She's been a regular co-sponsor, but she was first on the list to sign up to be a co-sponsor of America's Red Rock Wilderness Act this time. And those kids are the ones who deserve the credit.
Thank you, Clayton.
Thank you.